All right, how's it going out there, folks? Welcome back here to a Thursday. It is the Earthmaster out here about 9:46 a.m. California time. Latest activity shows some earthquake activity in Southern California here on the Malibu Coast Fault Zone here. Fairly lengthy fault just outside of Los Angeles. Extends out here towards the Santa Cruz mountain range, or Santa Cruz Island, excuse me. We did have a 4.7 earthquake earlier this morning, a couple hours ago. In fact, about 7 miles deep here into the surface, or underneath the surface here of the Malibu Coast Fault Zone. This earthquake was felt broadly over the area, as you can see on the USGS map here, even all the way down into San Diego. The epicenter of this earthquake, once again, just outside of Malibu on the coast, really close to Highway 1 here. This is a little scary. And of course, we've seen a lot of aftershock sequences here following that 4.7. Quite a few 2s in the mix there, and looks like the largest aftershock sequence so far is going to be a recent 3.5 here in the last 10 minutes. Now, if you've been watching this channel, you'll know I've been chatting a lot about the elevated earthquake activity out here in Southern California in general. Not just this earthquake activity today, but this recent activity is adding on to the overall picture of all the strain that we've been seeing out here in Southern California here recently. I was looking at a couple comments here in a news article, and a lot of folks are under the assumption here that all these earthquakes that we've been seeing are preventing us from seeing that big one. It's releasing strain out here, and that is not the case, folks. That is scientifically proven that it is not the case. Dr. Lucy Jones here, the seismologist, the face of the earthquake community, even stated that on live TV, that these earthquake swarms here in various areas are preventing us and kind of further pushing off the big one from happening is false. Those claims there that people are spreading around that these little swarms, prevent the big one from happening, that is not the case, folks. That's a very false statement. So if anything, it's all these extra swarms and elevated areas are increasing the likelihood of seeing a bigger earthquake out here. I've been saying it here for the past couple months. So today's activity, just another sign here of the bigger one, I think, getting a lot closer out here. The plate boundary, the San Andreas fault here, has been building up steam here for over 300 years. The southern branch here, that's capable of producing an 8.1 magnitude earthquake. So now I got to remember here, if we go back the last couple weeks, various areas of intensifying earthquake activity here, and now today's activity points towards the San Andreas fault here, folks. Even though it's away from the plate boundary here, it's still an overall sign here of the pattern of stress that's been applying out here on the San Andreas fault. In this, you can pretty much draw a circle out here around this area. So, goodness. I'm going to take a look at these aftershock sequences here, make sure I get everything off. 4.7, a couple minutes later we had a 2.8. Couple 3s in there so far. Total tally of the earthquakes in this little sequence of activity is 17. Now this one is similar, at least in terms of the sequence of events here, similar to the 5.2 we've seen up here in the Bakersfield area, just outside of Bakersfield here, a month or so. Been about 6 weeks now, almost 2 months ago, where they seen a 5.2 and a bunch of aftershock sequences. Other areas, such as around Los Angeles and many other seismic swarms we've seen here in the last couple months, just kind of starts up as a swarm with no main sequence quake followed by aftershock series. This is following the Bakersfield series where we've seen a 4.7. I don't think this is nothing here in the last week. So we had a 4.7, then followed up here by a bunch of aftershock sequences here. But there's some threes in there, so we'll have to watch this, see if this doesn't get any maybe some bigger activity around this area. Malibu Coast fault here. I believe there's a thrust zone out here that is capable of producing a larger magnitude earthquake. Here's the same region I pulled up on the historical data here. Now you got Malibu back over here. They had a 5.3 back in 1930. Roughly, let me go back and get rid of this map. Roughly to the east of where we're seeing today's activity. You can pretty much see that line here, that fault line, even though it doesn't show it. Well, it actually does show it here on the map. Okay. 6.0 back in 1827. And that 1827 earthquake, yeah, that happened, almost 200 years ago. Goodness. And then a little bit later, what, trying to think when we've seen that 1857 earthquake up here. Well, yeah, it was 1857, but I can't remember exact location out here. Anyway, we got some big potential out here, possibly. Not only across the plate boundary, but the Malibu fault zone here is capable of producing some larger quake activity. And it looks like it's been a while since we've seen any decent earthquake activity out there on that fault zone. Again, portion of it, I believe, is a thrust fault here across the Malibu area. You got these mountain ranges, so that would make sense. You can see a little canyon range here as well. That ends roughly around the Santa Cruz Islands area. 5.1, 1973, 5.5, 1926. Again, a lot of this is some older earthquake activity, so strain has built up out here across not only this fault zone that we're talking about right now, but many other areas. Goodness, Southern California is just getting ready. Technical information on the Malibu Coast fault. It shows type of fault a reversed fault, but it looks like there's some thrust out there due to those mountain ranges being built up. Surface rupture recent. Slip rate is roughly around 0.3 mm per year. A little uncertain, though, on the intervals between major earthquakes. This is a north dipping fault. The slip rate may be higher at its eastern end, where it meets the Santa Monica fault and develop left reverse motion. So that makes sense here. Stronger and more, a little bit higher slip rate here across the eastern areas here around this mountain range. And again, I don't even know if that's the largest earthquake that can strike out there on that fairly lengthy fault system. Could be a little bit higher. So at least that's what the USGS has. Over here around the Santa Barbara Channel, there was this 7.1 back in 1812. See all these older earthquakes out here, folks? I'm telling you, something out here is brewing. I've been saying it for the last 2 months with the elevated activity out here. That's why I've kept this California earthquake watch up for the extended period, because even though we've had a number of earthquake swarms and moderate earthquake activity in various locations here, we have not seen a full rupture in many of these areas that are capable and potentially well overdue. Like the, for example, this one here, the Malibu fault zone. Obviously, it can get a lot stronger than the 4.7 historically. The uncertainty, though, exists on when the next earthquake could potentially happen out here due to the reoccurrence interval there is uncertain. We got activity up here across unnamed faults in Bakersfield that was elevated. Ridgecrest area, of course, they've seen some earthquakes back in 2019. A series of earthquakes, 6-pointer, and then a day later a 7-pointer. But the aftershock sequence here has really ramped up in the last couple months, along with various areas of elevated earthquake activity. More recently, also around the Puente Hills thrust fault in Los Angeles, where they've seen that 4.4. where they saw that 4.4, and a bunch of other areas out here in California, not to mention the inland activity around Las Vegas northward in a fashion. So this is, again, just another day of new earthquake activity in a new location around the San Andreas Fault. From Santa Monica here to Palmdale may seem like a distance. It's only about 30 miles. So if you think of the plate tectonic side of things here, how massive these plates are, the North American Pacific Plate, that's just right there. So that's why we're always seeing the earthquake around this area that could potentially lead up to a much bigger quake here on the San Andreas Fault. Now remember, it's been over 300 years, and I keep saying that because it's coming. There's some bigger activity coming, I feel. We've seen more earthquakes this year than we have in any time in the past. I can't remember what Lucy Jones said. Dr. Lucy Jones mentioned not counting the Ridgecrest activity sequence of quakes. I think it was since the 80s she mentioned. So there's a lot of elevated activity out here in Southern California here recently, and that's a little concerning. The likelihood of a bigger one is increasing day by day here. Now, over the past 5-6 days, I think we've had minor activity. Let's see here. There's that movement around Ontario. That in itself had a little bit of earthquake swarming. So we would technically have to say the last... let's see. When was that swarm there? 1.3, 2008. There was a couple, or not 2008, but 9/8. There was a few here, it looks like, yesterday in that same area. But the brunt of the seismic swarm here, south of the Rancho Cucamonga area, in that Fontana swarm area, was a couple days ago. So we had a couple days of somewhat quiet activity with no swarm compared to the past few weeks here of various areas seeing intensifying swarms and some minor to moderate earthquake activity out here, including that 5.2 in Bakersfield. Just an overall pattern here. Today's activity, an overall pattern and sign of potentially what's to come out here for Southern California. That's a bigger earthquake. The question is, which one is overdue? I mean, there's a lot overdue, but which one is it going to strike on? It's been a long time since we've seen any full-scale rupture out here across the Malibu Coast Fault, the Puente Hills Thrust Fault, the San Andreas Fault. Many areas, I'm telling you guys, are way overdue. Yeah, that's a little concerning here. So we'll continue to watch the Southern California area for some movement, larger scale potential. Far as any seismograph station goes locally here to this area, I don't have one pulled up. I can look around, see if I have, or if I can access one in that area. I do have a number of California seismograph stations, but they're a little bit out of the area. But I'll have to go through these here in a little bit, because there's literally hundreds of them that I have to go through to see if they're going to work or not. For now, the Grapevine Ranger Station, that is not actually the Grapevine here across the mountain range around Tehachapi along I-5. That is, not Tehachapi's on 58, but I-5 runs through this area, through the Tehachapi Mountains, and they call this little area the Grapevine. But this Grapevine Station is over here around Nevada, and I'm seeing earthquake activity over there. I was looking at it yesterday as well, and they're apparently not adding earthquakes out here in the last 24 hours for Nevada. There's a couple of them, but I think there's more activity happening out there. It's drawn a lot of attention here recently. Last 30 days of earthquake activity, we've seen various swarms out here in a linear fashion right up against here the eastern side of, it's off of the Sierra Nevada mountains, but right here where you would expect a lot of strain to be built up due to the overall strain on the San Andreas Fault. Look how many earthquakes we've had here just in this area I'm just going to zoom in here specifically in Southern California alone. 1,685 earthquakes. That is a lot of earthquake activity here in the last 30 days. Now, these include small microquake areas as well, but got to remember these microquakes in a seismic swarm are very important to study, because that tells me right there where areas of increasing strain are happening, and the overall picture here points to the San Andreas fault. We've seen a more noticeable swarm here increasing specifically on this segment of the southern branch of the San Andreas fault there near Desert Hot Springs, just north of where this bend is. And, swarms all around the Southern California area. This is technically something I haven't seen here in my studies of geology, which have been for quite a while. And it's definitely, I feel, leading towards something bigger happening out here, folks. Yes, if you think about it, we've seen, seismic swarms down here along the Brawley seismic zone, hundreds of earthquakes a couple years back, and they happen. But broad scale seismic swarms in various areas, notable areas around a major plate boundary that's well overdue for some big time earthquake activity is a little rare. So I think, if anything, this is all pointing to bigger activity, folks. Got to be on guard out here. Numerous regions here just in the last 30 days. If you add in the previous 30 days here, we would see a lot more earthquake activity here on the map in many different zones here. So keep an eye on Southern California. It's going to go. Eventually it's going to go. Now, whether this is the telltale sign of it coming to pass here pretty soon, who knows? I guess we'll see. Either way, stay on guard. Be prepared. Further up north here across Northern California, what do we got up here by me? I live outside here, the Chico area, by the way. 2.4 near Hamilton City, 18 miles deep. One thing I've noticed out here in the valley is we've seen an increasing amount of fracking operations and natural gas wells. This is a 2.4 earthquake. I'm not seeing any pads out there, but down in Glenn County here outside of Willows, there's a number of these gas wells. If I were to zoom in, you'd see these little holding tanks here on these little pads, and they all look identical. But anyway, there's just a little small earthquake out there right now, 2.4. Down here across the Clear Lake volcanic field, these are hydrothermal plants, so not a whole lot going on of concern, unless there's they're making a weak spot up here above a heated area, poking holes there in a volcano to produce energy. There's a whole process involved in that, by the way, but I can't help but wonder, poking all these little tiny holes here is undermining the integrity of the land here, where the pressure and the heat is underneath this area. I might pop the top here with all these humans poking holes in here. Never know. Just kind of a thought. Up around the Mount St. Helens area, a couple of smaller quakes, really nothing big. So let's look at the overall picture here today. Yesterday, saw a lot of earthquake activity here across the Vanuatu area. Swarm of earthquakes here in the 5 range, upper 5 range, and a bunch of other smaller quakes in the upper 4 range. So that's an interesting sequence of events there. A lot of earthquake activity. That is left in yesterday's time period. So that area has gone quiet. I need to add this back onto the globe here. I don't know why it did that, but it wants to take the time frame here and go down. So I manually adjusted it back to normal here. Big picture right now paints activity not only along the eastern area of the Pacific Plate, California included, but also over here on the northwestern corner of the Pacific Plate, around Japan southward. where there's a little bit of earthquake activity here last night, and more notable activity today with a 4.7 around the Izu Trench, 28 miles deep here into the southern end of it. That's from last night. Handful of smaller quakes up here across the Aleutian Trench. My goodness. I think most of the activity here, folks, is definitely pointing towards the West Coast area for some larger scale activity. Hawaii, let's see what we got out here. Well, some earthquake activity today, ones and a couple twos in there, but yesterday there's a swarm of quakes up here across the summit area of Kilauea Volcano and up around the Upper East Rift Zone here, so we'll have to watch that. Obviously, when the Pacific Plate moves over the hotspot area, that can intensify areas around the volcanoes here across the Big Island. All right, so yeah, California, goodness, just be on guard here. It looks like things are wanting to move out here across the West Coast. Space weather activity had an X flare from the far side sunspot I've been chatting about. It's going to be over here, coming around the bend, coming around the eastern side here of the sun. I said to watch for this because it was throwing off some large flares and CME explosions here over the last week or so while it was out there on the further out there on the far side of the sun. So that did produce an X flare, an X 1.3 solar flare from sunspot. It's not named yet, and everyone calls it a new sunspot. Well, technically it's not new. Its former sunspot number was 3792. So last time it was over here on the Earth-facing side of the sun, which is this area, 3792. It's gone back around this far side of the sun to come into view, and it will get renamed as a new sunspot. But it's technically not a new sunspot. In fact, it could be a sunspot that was out here 4 or 5 times ago. These sunspots stay consistent, sometimes very strong, and then they'll die off, and then maybe they'll redevelop as they go around the far side of the sun a couple times. And yeah, it's not a new sunspot that has popped up out of the blue. Just figured I'd throw that out there, but it's former sunspot 3792. It will get renamed a new sunspot number once it's further into the Earth-directed view here. And right now it's just on the eastern edge, but it's popping X flares, and it has been over the last week. The more recent one, that X 1.3. that popped off here earlier this morning. Looks like another M flare in there as well. So things are going to get active in terms of the space weather activity. Now, earlier this morning, it's still somewhat early here, California time, we had G3 conditions observed here. KP index up around the 6 to 7 range. 7 range, actually, in fact, was measured on the KP index here. Bad timing. That is some bad timing here for the auroras across the North American side. Over there across Europe and other areas, well, you guys probably got some nice auroras out there earlier this morning. Things have since calmed down. This is probably due to the arrival of the early CME. That CME was expected tonight. So that has potentially put a little kink in the aurora activity tonight for the North American side. But who knows? Kevin's got it pointed out here on the solarham.com site. The CME incoming, elevated density, speed, temperature. Unfortunately, look at this. Here's the BZ component of the interplanetary magnetic field north of this line here. And that is normally a sign of suppression of the auroras. When it first came in here, it looks like there was a little bit of an opening here. Let me go check the real time. Real-time solar wind here. All right, this is a little bit better view There was looks like a number of CMEs that came in last night and early this morning, ramping things up. So here's the speed. It looks like one CME right here, another CME, because that coincides there also with the BZ component here interaction. Notice that's well south here of that line, indicating the BZ component of the interplanetary magnetic field, allowing the aurora amplification. A little bit of adjustment to the north here above that line, but overall, that's why we've seen that G3 storming conditions here, because that is way south, the red line, south of the or bottom of this line here. And it's kind of looks like it's a little bit open as well here over the last hour or so. With that being said, I think it's possible we could see some further amplifications tonight once it gets dark. It could fluctuate with that BZ component. Either way, it looks like the arrival of the CMEs have hit us. So unsettled conditions will probably remain well after dark. Here's tonight's forecast. Originally, KP index up around the 6. This may change, though, because this is we've seen an early arrival of the combination of a number of CMEs. So for us on the North American side of the Earth here, we may not actually see this because this was the original forecast, and the timing was supposed to be later tonight. So early arrival may not play out like this, but we'll see what happens. Overall, the forecast here calls for some unsettled conditions tonight and early tomorrow as well. So we'll see. Well, I guess we'll just take a look. Either way, G3 conditions, goodness. That was observed first at 14:43 UTC time. It is currently 1715, so about 3 hours ago. Little spike of an earthquake there on Mount St. Helens. That's a well-defined spike. Let me go up here and see where that's at. USGS not reporting that. This earthquake here is, well, actually 1.7, 10 o'clock. Yeah, that would make sense. 10:01. So, yeah, that is the earthquake. I'm just so used to saying that they're not reporting it, right? It's just stuck in my head. But they're reporting that 1.7. That came in fairly nice here outside of Mount St. Helens, but it did show up on the seismograph station here fairly nicely. 1.7 earthquake. All right, anyway, big picture, California. Keep an eye on that. Let me get back to space weather here. Flare threat. Right now, it's only at a 15% chance for X-flare, but I think as that sunspot area gets a little bit more into the Earth-directed view, we're going to see that flare threat rise up to about 25% chance, if not higher. It has been a source of a number of large X-flares while it was on the far side of the sun, multiple explosions. So now it's barely visible out here on the southeastern limb. That will come into view in the coming days and give us a better shot of seeing some significant CME activity and some large flares in the mix as well. All right, Storm Prediction Center here. Severe weather, a little bit of activity due to the remnants of Francine down there across the southeast or some of the southern states, mainly due to tornado activity. Got a 5% chance here across areas of Montgomery, Alabama, Tallahassee, Florida. Heads up for that area. Also some thunderstorm activity into eastern Montana with a 2% chance of tornadic activity up there. Wind and some hail threats going to be a big issue up there as well with those thunderstorms. All right, folks, we'll catch you guys back out here a little bit later. Wanted to get some information out there on some activity in Southern California. Don't get complacent. There's been way more earthquake activity out here in Southern California than we have seen in a long time. And as Dr. Lucy Jones stated live and all over the place, With more earthquake activity out here in the 3, 4, and 5 range, the likelihood of larger earthquake activity exists here. And it's just an overall sign, an overall pattern here of increasing earthquake activity out here. It does not release strain out here. This earthquake activity does not release and does not prevent the big one from happening. If anything, it's increasing the likelihood of a big earthquake happening out here. More than likely on the San Andreas fault here, but can't rule out some of these other fault systems here that are well overdue as well. All right, have a good day. We'll continue to monitor the activity. Tomorrow's Friday. What's the day? Thursday, right? Yeah, it is Thursday. Okay. Been a crazy day so far. We'll catch you guys out here later. Stay safe.